Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as...
It's basically the center for me. You know, it's the core of what I love doing. I know for a fact, even if I kind of fall out of love with certain things in my life, nothing is going to cause me to stop loving being an advocate like I am, because I think of where I was when I was in high school and even younger, not knowing what to do when I first got diagnosed, just being very upset, thinking it was just going to make everything worse. And then thinking where I'm at now and knowing that that's like my favorite part of where my life is at, is that I get to have those opportunities where I go in and speak to people and have them take things away like that.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Welcome to the Season 8 finale episode, and we've got a lot here. It's been my pleasure to be with you over the course of an 8th season of Tourette's podcast, with the occasional fantastic guest host along the way. Thanks to the Tourette Association of America for being our sponsor for another dynamic season of really great conversation with so many different walks of life with Tourette syndrome and how similar a lot of the experience can be. Not to detract from our very individual experiences, I want to dedicate this episode, and this is heavy. I want to dedicate this episode to someone we lost in the Tourette community very recently. His name's Ryan Lawrence, 21 years old, from Ontario, Canada. I first heard from his family in, I think, 2021 about Ryan's very complex tics, an extremely challenging experience with Tourette syndrome, which Ryan was diagnosed with when he was very young, age of 7. Basically, I was in conversation with his family about how to get him relief from these tics that had developed. Ryan's tics have become self-damaging in recent years. And again, for everybody listening, we're talking about involuntary tics. And Ryan's tics had become self-damaging. He eventually needed to undergo medical procedures and a plastic surgery to address some of the effects. And this is heavy to talk about. But there are cases of Tourette syndrome that are indeed that dynamic and difficult, to put it mildly, to keep in mind. So we had been talking, and the Tourette Association was providing its expertise and connections along the way. Sadly, there was another issue hiding in the background, and that was cardiomyopathy, which is a disease of the heart, and Ryan very suddenly passed away from it. This was just recently on February 21st, and devastating because... Well, I've been in touch with Ryan's dad, Greg Lawrence, who is an amazing person from all the conversation I've had with him. Greg explained that Ryan had developed, and I'm getting into some of the details here, but the details matter, you'll see. So Ryan had developed shortness of breath. He went to the emergency room and was diagnosed with bacterial pneumonia. The professionals said this bacterial pneumonia was caused by something that Ryan's dad knew was related to his ticking. Again, remember, Ryan had complex Tourette syndrome. One doctor called it the most challenging case he had seen. And in the chain of events with the stress from the pneumonia, the cardiomyopathy meant his heart couldn't keep up. It was under too much stress. And we lost Ryan, which seems so inexplicable and hard to process because Ryan, by all accounts, was full of life and really funny. He was a talented athlete. He played high-level hockey and lacrosse. He was actually offered a scholarship to play lacrosse. I want to read you something Ryan's dad told me. Quote, "Throughout his high school years, he had tics, but not many people knew he had Tourette's. One time, a hockey coach said Ryan was shaking his head a lot while playing hockey, and they wondered if he had a neck problem. When I told one of the coaches, he felt terrible and never said another word. When Ryan was first diagnosed, they said he will likely be treated as an outcast and be made fun of, or no one will care and he will have a lot of friends. I was very happy that the second scenario is what happened. From what I heard, if he was in a stressful situation and a vocal or movement tic occurred, he would often make it a joke and people would laugh. Ryan had a great sense of humor. At his funeral, the stories were endless. His nickname was Larry. And one day he bought a lobster at the local grocery store and let it loose in the high school on a leash. After being called to the office, hashtag Free Larry the Lobster trended on Instagram. In the valedictorian speech at his graduation, this was mentioned. End quote. That was Ryan's dad, Greg, just to give you an idea of Ryan's character. And again, this is very sad, recent news. What Greg Lawrence, Ryan's dad, is focused on right now is an idea that has the support of professionals to develop a care clinic at Toronto Western Hospital for people with complex tic disorders like Ryan's, incorporating psychiatry and neurology. And fundraising for this is going on. Greg said within a week of Ryan's passing, they had raised more than $7,000 for it, which is amazing. But of course, they need to raise more to make it a reality. Greg said he's starting a foundation on Ryan's behalf to help fund Tourette's treatments for families in need, Tourette service dogs, and to help fund the clinic. I'll put this information in the show notes with this episode at tourettespodcast.com. Ryan's obituary, which I will include, does explain where and how to make donations. Greg says, quote, "We are all in this together." And that's a theme that runs through this episode, again, dedicated to Ryan Lawrence and his family who are fighting to make the world a better place for Tourette syndrome. I hope this clinic becomes a reality. Thank you to the people all around the world fighting for Tourette syndrome. Tourette can be so difficult for people to comprehend. It's hard to pin down an easy treatment a lot of the time for people who seek that. But together we're sharing stories and educating and making acceptance ideally more individually achievable than it used to be. And we're advancing science to help with the provision of treatment for people with Tourette syndrome who seek that. Thank you to the doctors and researchers with expertise in Tourette doing amazing things. If you need a medical provider, by the way, for your Tourette, that is, you can go to tourette.org and navigate to the Find a Provider section where you can enter a location. You can just type in, where you live and select the clinical expertise that you're looking for, whether it's counseling or psychiatry or neurology. And then it'll give you a map of results, the providers in the Tourette Association's database that are closest to you based on your selection criteria or your search criteria. This is for our North American audience. Your country or region may have its own support organization. I know we need support around the world and not everywhere has it. As for the Tourette Association of America, bookmark touretteconference.org. That is the official website of Tic Con. That's a virtual event the TAA is holding. It's actually the virtual national conference on May 19th and 20th of this year. Again, a virtual event. It says on the website, again, touretteconference.org, that the first day will be dedicated to our annual research symposium and the second day to our family, youth, and education conference. Your all-inclusive registration entitles you to attend both exciting events. This is free. You can register at touretteconference.org. You can also check out the agenda or learn how to become a sponsor, exhibitor, or advertiser. Again, touretteconference.org, the website of Tic Con, May 19th and 20th, online for free, with an important agenda to advance the wellness of the Tourette community. This is the National Conference of the Tourette Association of America, sponsor of Tourette's Podcast. Tourette's Podcast is global, whether you're in the US or Canada, Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, South America. No matter where you're from, Tourette is a life experience for sure, and we can talk about it with each other around the world. Sophia, who has been with Tourette's Podcast for years at this point as the Facebook discussion group admin, is from the UK, and she maintains an amazing discussion group for people all over the planet to discuss Tourette syndrome, ask questions, talk about things heard on the show, and so on. Thank you so much, Sophia, for your support over yet another season of the podcast. It's been amazing. I think one of the last posts I made in the discussion group asked whether your Tourette affects the art you make. If you're an artist or like creative outlets, it's an interesting mix of answers. Again, to this question I posted in the Tourette's Podcast discussion group about whether Tourette affects the art that you make. And again, yeah, it's an interesting mix of answers, including one from past Tourette's Podcast guest, musician Chris Clement, who reminded me that we talked about this in season 1 of the podcast years ago. He's a musician and songwriter, and he's made an interesting connection between his Tourette's and his writing of odd time signatures, which makes sense to me. It's like the suddenness of tics, I guess. If you're an artist and Tourette affects your work, explain how in the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook. Okay, so the conversation coming up is a strong one. Covers lots of ground with our eloquent guest, Allen Shoaf, who is 2 years out of high school and currently doing a lot with the Tourette community. This interview, okay, so you know how I said in the last episode that I got hit with laryngitis for a couple weeks? I was mostly recovered by the time I recorded this conversation, but still a little, you can hear a little bit of it, just to explain in case I sound different. Anyway, it doesn't matter. This is a strong conversation. Allen's story will reflect how a lot of you, or how a lot of people with Tourette or a tic disorder feel about their condition, their situation, their predicament, whatever word you want to use to describe your experience with the uncomfortable side of Tourette syndrome or another kind of tic disorder. Allen actually brings up a lot of stuff that I wish we had talked about more over the course of the podcast. Even, like feeling guilty in a way about the attention that Tourette can require when other people have their own stress and situations going on, and you're kind of relying on them for help. I really relate to that. And the anxiety that can come with tic disorders anyway. We talk about performance at school. Allen points out that he was really bad at taking tests, and same here. I was a terrible test taker in school. And a lot of anxiety came with that, as well as a mark on my confidence. And all kinds of weird and bad things can roll out of that. Anyway, Allen touches a lot of closely familiar to me anyway, familiar subject matter when it comes to the ups and downs of living with a tic disorder like Tourette. Warning for your consideration, like I said, we do talk about a lot of stuff, a lot of different subjects, and that includes at some points talking about suicidal ideation and suicide, which may be a sensitive topic for some listeners. Just wanted to point that out. Other topics include agoraphobia, depression, dealing with bullies, but lots of upbeat stuff too. We discuss what's worked well for Allen, getting closer to where he wants to be. There's just a lot to relate to here, is what I'm saying. And so much of it hits, including the power in someone with Tourette syndrome meeting somebody else who also has Tourette. Allen, who I'm happy to say is living in a much happier mental space today. And we discuss what happened. Actually, Allen is an amazing person with a really nice nature, very perceptive. And you might be nodding along with him at a lot of points throughout this episode. There's a lot of reality here. And he does have great advice here for people, including parents who care for or might become concerned about someone in their life with Tourette. And of course, there's a lot directly for people with a tic disorder like Tourette to digest. Allen is a rising leader and a youth ambassador with the Tourette Association of America. Glad he is. He just connects here. It's really good. It's a really appropriate finale episode. Let's get to the conversation now. This is me with Allen Shoaf. Well, cool. Well, just for the record, so we get it straight, could you tell us your name and the general part of the world that you live in, and what you do, what you're up to, how you would introduce yourself to this audience?
Yeah, so my name is Allen Shoaf. I am a 20-year-old that lives in East Canton, Ohio. Just the greatest state in the country. Everyone loves Ohio, including people live here. This is a little sarcasm for you, but yeah, I live in East Canton. I grew up in the more Perry Township area of Canton, which is closer to where Canton City is, which is where the Pro Football Hall of Fame is. That's like the big thing of note that everyone knows about. But I am in my second year out of high school, currently in the middle of my second year off of education. High school was an experience that didn't exactly make me prepared or excited for the next step in my going into education for college.
Gotcha.
So I'm taking time off just to kind of get my footing where I want to be, figure out what I want to do. I'm currently working at a hospital as a housekeeper, part-time, kind of split part-time to be able to do, things like this, my advocacy work. I am a rising leader and youth ambassador with the Tourette Association of America.
Nice.
And fulfilling those roles, getting able to do things like the webinars they do for their online webinars that they do. I've featured on a couple of those even before I graduated. And that's basically the main split of my time right now, is just trying to fulfill my role as an advocate, whether it's stuff that I do through the TAA or my own projects that I've been working on, and then work, which I'm grateful for my job, but it isn't exactly glamorous. So it takes up a lot of stress on the tough days. So, but yeah, that's basically my life right now, just split between working the paying job and doing the passion stuff, which is things I do with advocacy.
And enjoying Ohio, which is funny because I'm in North Carolina and we sort of have this like rivalry over the Wright brothers and, who claims credit for being, like first in flight or first in birthplace of aviation or whatever I think is what Ohio says. So we'll try not to fight about that, but there's some cool stuff in Ohio coming to mind. I'm thinking of some good bands I like. I think Devo was from Ohio, Afghan Wigs, Guided by Voices.
Well, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame being here,
right?
Even if you don't have the origination of any good artists, they're gonna be there. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just having that staple of like, we're making sure that our longevity is like purposed through this. People will come and perform just to try to say like, hey, like we want to be here. So you get a lot of good concerts lined up.
Yeah. Well, I guess Cleveland is kind of a classic, rock kind of town, and I know we're moving to a different state now, but I think Cleveland and Michigan have always had this sort of, kind of rock history thing. So we talked about your job. We talked about, personal projects you have and then official stuff like being a youth ambassador or being an ambassador to the TIA and a rising leader. Where did all this begin for you? Do you remember how young you were when signs of Tourette syndrome started to set on?
Yeah. So when I first started developing tics, I was about 7, I want to say. And what it was the most simple tic to start out with. There was one motor tic where I took both of my forearms and I kind of lifted them up to my center chest area. And my dad basically, one day after seeing it for a while, it was like he realized it had been going on for a couple of days, and he pulled my mom aside and he's like, what is going on with Allen's velociraptor arms? Because it looked like how dinosaurs have their arms pulled up into their chest. That's what it looked like I was doing. So he was like, he had no idea what was going on. We were unaware with Tourette syndrome. Basically, I don't think my mom had ever heard of it. And the most my dad heard of it was coprolalia, but he had no idea that was even a word at that time.
Yeah.
So he took us up to Akron Children's, which is a hospital that I will continue to praise any chance I do. They're currently a center of excellency with the TAA, and all of their help is the reason that I'm even a youth ambassador, because without my psychologist kind of pushing me to take the steps I needed, I would never even think about submitting an application to do this. So I give all the praise to them. But at first, when I first went there, I was about 9 years old when I first started doing treatment, because at first it was just the velociraptor arm thing. And then I developed a vocal tic, that we called the Meep. And because there's a character in Phineas and Ferb, which we watched religiously in our household when we were younger. His name was Meep, and he would make a sound where he would just say Meep, but I would go, and it would sound like that.
I had the same tic. I had the same tic when I was around that age.
I've always been appreciative when my tics develop into simple things like that, like because they're not painful,
right?
And they don't bother me. It's not very loud, so people don't really pick up on it. And so it's just like, if I could just have the simple tics that don't make me want to lay down and cry because I'm in so much pain, that would just be fantastic. But that was the second tic I had developed. And for the longest time, those were the only 2 that I had had. So, and because Tourette syndrome wasn't a super prevalent study going on, there wasn't a lot of knowledge about it as there is today. I didn't go see someone for Tourette syndrome. I went and saw someone to help me with child anxiety. And so they put me on a medication, clonidine is what it was, which is often a blood pressure medication, but it can also be used for nervous tics. And I took that for about 3 years as a kid, I want to say. Not super long, because it didn't really do anything. It might have made me a little bit more relaxed, which it dealt with the anxiety like it should have been, but it didn't affect my tics at all. And then after that, we reach age 10. And that was when I started kind of being what I call kind of the area of my life where depression really was severe.
Yeah.
My dad is like my hero. When I was 5 years old, he had a botched kidney transplant that sent him into a doctor-induced coma, a medically induced coma, excuse me, for about, I want to say 2 months, either 2 or 2.5 months. And so he wasn't present because of that. He was in the hospital. My mom really had to pick up the weight with, I was only 5. My brother would have been 3, and my sister was only about 8 months old. And after he was out of that, he didn't really get up off the couch for, I want to say, like a year, because he was just so sick. He has pretty bad anxiety as well. He and I have kind of talked about that through our journey. Like, it doesn't come up as often, but when it strikes, I really feel for him. So, but because of that, he ended up going on dialysis because transplant did not work. And we would spend a lot of time, him and I, doing things that would center around, how do you hang out with your dad when he's stuck to a chair for 4 hours? You know, so we would just kind of sit and talk or watch movies or play video games, because it wasn't very often we could go outside and, you know, throw a baseball or a football like we can now, because he's a lot healthier than he was back then. But because of my dad being kind of in that medical state that he was, I had this irrational feeling as a kid that because that was the center of what was going on in the house, anything that I started feeling whatsoever is just added pressure or like a burden, basically. Because my mom was super stressed. She did so much for us. And with my dad being as sick as he was, whenever he wasn't at work, he was doing dialysis. It kind of developed this irrational thought in my head that, like, yeah, things aren't going well for you. Like, I dealt with bullying pretty badly, even before that, not even to deal with tics, because I was very emotional as a kid. I did not know how to really control my emotions. And I think that kind of came with the anxiety that goes with Tourette syndrome.
Well, it makes me think, when I was a kid, I definitely struggled with anxiety at school. You know, when I was separated from my parents or anything like that. And I would cry a lot, you know, and that sort of, you know, just sort of fused itself to my reputation of, like, you know, I'm the problematic of, you know, crybaby kid, like whatever you want to call me. I was the emotional one that was sensitive or whatever it was. But I mean, you're going through a lot of stuff. You're going through a whole lot of stuff. And you said earlier that the clonidine, even though it might have calmed you down or dealt with some of the anxiety of it, it didn't necessarily affect your tics. Was the you know, sometimes stress and anxiety can, you know, overlap pretty heavily, but was the stress of all this charging up tics for you? I mean, anything about that was affecting your Tourette?
I would say, looking back at it now, I can definitely see that was the case. Not when I was younger. I mean, I was 10, 11, like that thought never crossed my mind. But looking back at it now, that was when it didn't bring up frequency of, not frequency, but it didn't bring up more tics. It just brought the frequency of the ones that I had up to scale 11, you know? I didn't start developing more tics until later, around middle school age and around the time when I got diagnosed. But those tics that I had did start to frequent more often. I had no idea what they were. No one else really did. They're just like, what's the weird crying kid doing with his arms? You know, that was kind of the experience that I had. I was fortunate that I did have a couple of really close friends, and that's kind of how I remain today. I don't kind of characterize myself as someone who has like a ton of people that I would say that I'm like really good friends with. I'm acquainted and very friendly and appreciative of a lot of people. But if I'm someone who, if I consider you like a friend, you are like in that inner circle, and you are someone who's more like family to me.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of the same way it was growing up. I didn't have a ton of people who were friends because a lot of people saw me as just the weird, really emotional kid. Like, why is he crying? All that happened was a screw fell out of his glasses,
Right.
And things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And things that to other kids, when they got a bad grade on a test, it would just be like, oh man, I gotta, like, what's my mom going to say to me now? I would like have a full scale emotional meltdown when it happened. And I was a part of like the gifted program when I was growing up. And the way it works now is very different than like honors does for high schools and middle schools when I was a kid. Basically, the way it worked is no matter what grade you were in when I was in elementary school, if you were seen as a quote unquote like gifted student, you were put in like a different class with all of the other kids in that elementary school, regardless of grade, whether it's
Different
from
grades.
first to fifth.
Right.
And you all kind of did your own little thing that they graded you on. And I don't know how I maintained being in it because I had such a bad time taking tests, especially when I was younger. I was a terrible test taker.
Me too.
Yeah, I'd like to think that I was intelligent enough to be able to go through those classes. And I did pretty well in certain ones when I did get older, but especially when I was younger, I was very bad at taking tests. Like I would be able to do the homework when we would like sit around in a circle and do just fine. But the second it got time to, we need to sit at your desk and be quiet, go fill out this 20 question test or 10 question quiz real quick, I would get like C's, like C minus. And to some people, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. When I got to high school, C's were like, okay, that's not great, but this is passable.
Right.
But when I was younger, that was like, it was expected that you are smarter than this. You're in these quote unquote gifted classes. C's are not good enough. And I would like start shaking and like crying and freaking out. I'm like, this is not good enough for what it needed to be. And it caused a lot of more tics to come out. And I went to what's known as, we had 6 elementary schools in our district where I went. I had a graduating class of about 380 kids. So I went to a bigger high school, which I know some people, like my siblings go to a different school now. My brother is going to where we live, East Canton, and he has a graduating class of about like 80 people. So compare that to 300 more, it's a much different environment. And especially the high school I went to, it's not the best place to be. But I went to Durban, which is a school that's not standing, one of the 6 at the time elementary schools. And the room we were put in as gifted kids was like a little basement storage area. They reverted into a classroom with a smartboard and a couple of tables, and then 2 computers and a back corner room. And so it was very small. And when I started having like these times where I would just start crying or my tics would come out, even if no one paid much attention to it, because there wasn't much room for me to like go somewhere away from people, it would feel like all eyes were on me when it really never wasn't the case. Yeah. So it just made that, I'm sure you know what that's like. It just amplifies whatever you're going through.
It's a really, really, really weird crossroads of, for me anyway, at that age, feeling isolated, but also feeling like I'm at the center of attention. And it's, the 2 things that shouldn't square with one another, but you know what I mean when I say it.
Absolutely. And from there, it started to circle back to like where kind of that depression stage kicked in. Obviously being bullied the way I was, I did get beat up a couple of times. I don't really talk about that often because it didn't happen a ton.
For tics.
It was more just emotional picking on, but there were a couple of times where I was on the receiving end of that, and it really messes with you on top of everything else. And I know this is irrational, especially now because I'm very close with both of my parents. They're my cornerstone. They're amazing, and I genuinely don't think I'd even be alive if it wasn't for them and their guidance. But that's kind of when the aspect of suicidal ideation kind of kicked in with me. Was around age 10. And it really lasted until I was about 16 years old.
Did you keep that
So
inside, or were you talking to anybody about this?
no, I did not have like therapy that I was in. I'm in counseling now, and I've been in counseling for the past 5.5 years.
Yeah.
I think it's a very important thing for honestly everyone to try, even if you're
Yes.
not struggling with anxiety. I'm a big advocate of just trying to. It's something that can be very beneficial. And I know a lot of people have that fear of like, well, I don't know this person. How do I know that I can like confide in them? For me, it was nice because the first couple of appointments I had, my counselor went through CBIT with me, so that's how I
Really?
still. But yeah, they were the one who went through CBIT with me. It was her, and at the time, her basically, I don't want to say understudy, but that's kind of what she was.
Okay.
The two of them went through it, and my first couple of appointments were just getting to know me and me getting to know them on a level where I felt comfortable being
Sure.
able to confide things such as like, hey, sometimes I have thoughts of ending my life,
Yeah.
because that's not something you can just bring up easily. You can't really
Right.
be able to feel like you can confide in someone with that sort of information.
Well, right, because I mean, there's the judgment that can come. There's the misunderstanding that some people
Right.
have perceptions on what it means to what level of control they think you have over it. I mean, some people can be insulted at the even very mention that you've thought about it. Like some people take
Yeah.
offense, and so you don't. Yeah, it's very difficult to find somebody who you can say that to, unfortunately. But although I think all of us need to know who that person is and who we
Right.
go to when we have these feelings. But go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it is
No, you're fine.
It's a very difficult. I mean, especially at that age when
Right,
that you're young and you're still subject to authority and adults' misunderstandings, and I mean all kinds of things.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of what it was like, really. Obviously, I know now that I can tell my parents anything I need to, but back then, like I said, I had the fear of like, I don't want them to worry about me when there's already so much that we have to worry about.
Relates
Like
so much
I
to
was
that.
I was helping my dad with dialysis whenever I got home from school. So I was working with like the saline bags that he had, making sure that the machine was working. I don't know if everyone here listening like knows what dialysis is. It's basically if your kidneys cannot work to clean your blood like they're supposed to, your blood gets drawn out into a machine that goes through filters that cleans the blood for you and then puts the blood that is now cleaned back into your body.
Right.
So it's basically just replacing the function of your kidneys, which my dad needed.
Right.
And it freaked me out helping him sometimes, because if something can go wrong, like if air pockets or bubbles got into the bloodstream in the machine, they had to be basically removed for what we did. It's called like snapping and tapping. Like you're snapping the tubes to make sure that there's no air in there. Because if that air gets into your bloodstream and to your heart, it will kill you like instantly. So, and like the thought of that just caused even more anxiety in me. But like it was because I loved my dad. You don't want to see that ever happen. So even though it's a very smooth process and that happening is very rare and you have to be very negligent, which we were the opposite of whenever he was running dialysis.
Yeah.
But it would cause severe anxiety. And because of that, I knew everyone else had it. And the last thing I wanted to be is the kid in the family that tells your parents in a situation like that is like, hey, sometimes I think I want to die,
Yeah.
And I know it's not rational. I know they love me as much, if not more than I love him, which love all of them, which I know sometimes just doesn't even seem possible, but it's just the truth. And so I just kind of held on to it for the longest time. Middle school had its own slew of issues. I did end up meeting someone who became probably the most prevalent in terms of like bullies that I've had. Thankfully now he and I are actually on very good terms. Like I wouldn't say we're like buddy, like best friends or anything, but like every time we like run into each other, we'll like just make sure we're doing well and all of that. And it's very nice to have something like that, especially when back in like 7th and 8th grade, they were genuinely like very, very terrible for my mental health. They never did anything physical, but it was just the constant drawing attention to anytime I would get emotional or tics or just doing things that I don't even know if this person realized it, but setting off any sort of OCD that I deal with would drive me insane, and I couldn't focus on anything else.
Jeez.
Like,
so they're targeting like the whole iceberg with you, just anything that they can perceive, and I emphasize the word perceive as a weakness. They were going to jump on it.
Mm-hmm, yeah, and in the area that we are in, Perry, in Canton, mental health is a big thing now, but back then it was really like people weren't afraid to talk about it throughout school compared to where they are now, where we kind of have to be open. And I'll get to that when we get to high school.
Yeah.
But it was the sense of like this masculinity sense of like emotion equals weakness, even though that couldn't be further from this truth.
Right.
So bringing forward that sense of like, I'm still the kid that not nearly as much, like I don't cry if my glasses break at school anymore, but I've had anxiety attacks at school because of my grades. And I've just dealt with so much of like on days where the bullying would be really bad, I would have to excuse myself to go get like a quick 2-minute cry out of me so people wouldn't see that and make it even worse than it was. So when that's perceived, it makes it seem like, any show of emotion is just instantly invalidated because you're not quote unquote manning up, which I hate.
Yeah. Your sensitivity is a sign of weakness. You can't handle it. You can't put it away like a stoic man can do. And
right.
That sort of thing. Yeah. Can't stand
which
it.
Thankfully is starting to go away. We're not seeing that nearly as much, which is great. And I'm hoping it stays on that further track, but it's still there.
Yeah.
And it made it just even worse of me not wanting to confide in anyone, because like if, people I know don't like me are pointing out every small sign of tears streaming down my face or any sort of fear in my eyes, they would point out and exploit to make me look like I'm just not manly enough or anything like that, then like, how can I know that my closest friends are going to react opposite of that if I tell them the most extreme form of that fear is that I just don't want to be here. And it boiled over when I got to high school. Perry High School, I don't know who all saw this news, but it was everywhere when it started happening, especially in the state of Ohio. My freshman year, there were 6 kids in the Perry district that ended up dying by suicide, all in the span of about 5 months, I want to say.
Oh my gosh.
And it took its toll on everyone in its own way.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact I'm not the only person that went through this, but I was one of the people who throughout the time nearly attempted. I don't want to say that I'm like a full-on survivor because I never went through with my attempt. But my parents got hold of a friend of mine that I was talking to, and I was basically just saying that I can't do this anymore. And I didn't say that that's what I was doing, but I think I kind of know deep down that if no one came in to get me, that it unfortunately would have went there.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting checked in to do a psych evaluation after talking with my parents for about an hour, just going over everything, me finally letting everything out, because all of that's still pent up because like I would tell them things here and there, like they knew that I'd struggled with senses of bullying. And yes, I had anxiety because my mom went through CBIT with me. And obviously like we would talk with my dad about how things are going. And we were starting to get a little bit better with me starting to open up with them. But there were still things that I hadn't told them. I hadn't really told them that I had thoughts of suicidal ideation before. and all of the extent of the bullying had gone to. They didn't really know. They just knew that there was a lot of really bad emotional teasing going on. They didn't realize that it was the full extent of what it was. And so I just basically burst into tears and had zero filter, where I did not really stop talking unless my mom or dad wanted to say something to me.
Yeah.
And this was about at like 11 at night. And so we went up to Akron Children's to do a psych evaluation, and I stayed there. It was only 14 hours. I was not held in the hospital for longer than that. They just wanted to make sure that everything, because they didn't think that with it all out now that it would end up going further, which thankfully was true, but the thoughts still lingered consistently.
Yeah.
And after I had gotten home, I slipped into a depressive episode, and honestly an agoraphobic episode, where I didn't leave my house for 2.5 months. I didn't go to school. I didn't go out to church with my family. I didn't go get food. I did nothing. And anytime I would think about going outside, like even if I got outside like the line of my garage or my front porch, I would instantly feel nauseous.
Yeah.
Like the anxiety was like, you can't go out there. You know what's out there. You're not prepared to go back out to the constant eyes staring, because there's the feeling of like, unfortunately, people are going to find out. Like my parents had to notify the school that that's where I was when I went to the hospital.
I was going to ask about this. I mean, like this is something, especially if you sort of vanish for a little while, sometimes that's something people notice. Were you getting extra pressure from the outside? Were people asking questions, trying to find out? Was that adding to the pressure?
It was. And it was to the point where like even my friends, like some of my closest friends, just reaching out to check on me. Like it felt like I was doing something wrong, like I'm not being present when I need to be, and I know for a fact that I'm not the only one going through these sorts of things, and I can barely manage to text to say, hey, and it was really rough. Like I woke up every day, and basically every day I was certain that that day was going to be my last one.
Yeah.
Every time I woke up in the morning.
And so how old are you at this point? Just kind of so we can stick the pin in the map.
15 years old.
About 15 at that point.
This is my freshman year. My birthday is September 18th. Okay. And so I started out every school year at 14 for like 3 weeks until my birthday hit.
Okay.
So at this point, I'm 15. We're in... So I went to the hospital in the middle of December of 2017. And so this period of time was... January and February, which is why I kind of have this seasonal depression around when it starts snowing outside.
Okay.
Basically, the holiday season is never easy for me. Yeah. It's getting better and better the older I get, because I'm obviously a lot farther removed from where I'm at now. I'm in a much, much, much better mental headspace. I'm more appreciative of what I have. I'm more open about, talking about the things I've went through, and it's allowed me to it's definitely allowed me to manage when these things come up much, much more, to the point where even though I know I'm going to deal with kind of the aspect of that seasonal depression, where I do have some days where just I don't have the motivation to do anything, and I don't really talk to people like like I still live at home. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
So like I'll wake up and there'll be days where I just don't really say much to everyone, where I'm just like hi, like I'm here, and like they'll talk and joke around, and I'll laugh along, but I don't really talk a lot. And it's just because I'm kind of dealing with that aspect of those sort of feelings kind of being reminded to me.
Yeah.
But it's to a point where they're not in control of who I am like they used to be.
That's amazing.
That was, I'm very grateful for where I'm at right now. And I'm only hoping we just keep getting better and better, because it was very bad. So like I said, it was 2.5 months where I did nothing. I barely talked to anyone. And there are two things. I'm a firm believer that you can't really say when you're going through suicidal ideation, and all of that, or even attempts or self-harm or anything when you're in this depressive rut, it's not really possible to say that someone saved your life, in my opinion, unless they like physically stopped you from going through an unfortunate act.
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, everyone can say everything to make sure that you know that they're supporting you and that they love you and all of that. But it only comes down to you being perceptive enough to take that to heart.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it devalues the strength that it takes to finally get out of that rut. You know, like, because especially to someone who's going through something seriously depressive as an episode where you don't go outside for 2 months, undervaluing any sign of a step forward is a setback.
Yeah.
You know, and you should be able to understand that, yeah, these people were integral to getting you to where you are now, but you wouldn't be allowing them to be unless you were making the choice to try to, I don't want to say be better because that's not the best terminology for it, but to try to get to a point where you know you are better, you know?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it was for me. I mean, there were lots of people that were very beneficial and helpful, but the two that always come to mind are, well, both of my parents, specifically my dad, and then my best friend, Jake House, who is the dumbest smart person I ever know, excuse me. I say this lovingly. He's very intelligent, but also does very dumb things, but he does it with the goal to just try to make as many people laugh as possible. So he developed this thing when I was going through this called the Jake House Cures Depression series. And it's very, I know, it's so silly, but he would just film himself doing the dumbest things he possibly could. Like he would set his phone up on like a little coffee table and have a banana peel just sitting in the middle of his living room. And you would hear him scream, Mario Kart, and run full speed at the banana peel and slip and fall on it. You know, there was a video where he was talking with an inanimate object, snowman, about who was smarter, he or the snowman. Just really silly things like that. And it like allowed me to just kind of laugh.
Yeah.
You know, in a situation where I didn't know, you know, I could have those feelings because something was going on in my brain where all I could feel was this just pit of constant feeling like I had messed up and I wasn't enough. And I didn't know what it was like to feel good emotions anymore. And to get videos from him like that basically every day, it was like, okay, like you're not too far in this, you know, like it's making you realize that you have people that are there. Well, even when you're trying so hard to not realize that. They're like, no, you're going to pay attention. Watch me slip on this banana peel. Watch me jump down my stairs for no reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, what was he kind of being in a depressive, I'll just say the word episode, being in a depressive episode, you know, that can last and last and last. And then you finally have those moments where you laugh. It's a different kind of laughing. Like it's almost like you feel it more. It's like to feel something different by heavy, heavy contrast. So having people like that as, you know, your resources matters hugely. But, you know, before that, you were saying that, you know, you recognized the people around you who are trying to help and love you and all that stuff. But there's a difference between that and then finding a sense of community. And so like today, you know, like you're doing stuff with the Tourette Association. And I don't want to skip ahead to that yet, but I mean, what were some of the turning points that sort of got you to where you felt instead of just people around you trying to help, you started to feel a sense of like actual community?
So the biggest thing for me immediately was realizing my family as what they are, you know, and I might get a little emotional when I say this, but
go for it. Like
I am extremely close with all of them in my own way. Like my sister and I we're so weird. We're easily like the weirdest people that my parents have ever seen. But like in the best way, you know, we joke around, we have fun, we have very weird interests. We listen to very similar music. And I know we've brought this up, you and I, in the past about like the music that I listen to.
Yeah, definitely.
It scares people away because lots of just screaming that goes on and heavy music chugging.
That's relatable.
And she used to think that I was like, what's that?
It's relatable, you know, like
Yes,
the music that scares people away is something that, you know, I've always found, you know, some sense of connection to.
Right. Yeah. And to me, I've always seen it as like this amazing way of relieving anger, because when you're unable to let that sort of anger out, listening to a song where someone is literally screaming into a microphone, sometimes where it's very relatable lyrics, it's like someone's releasing that for you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know? Or going to a show and seeing it, you know, like seeing a band play live that's really intense. I mean, like you leave having felt it. Absolutely.
Yeah. But she used to think that it was like the worst thing ever, and why would anyone want to listen to something that sounds like that? And then we fast forward to now, and she listens to stuff that is like too heavy for even me to listen to, you know? So it's like her and I have like that sort of bond where we have the same weird interests in music and movies and TV shows like that. My brother and I have a weird relationship because we were like attached at the hip when we were very little. And then we had a very rocky relationship when I was a teenager, because I was very obviously going through my own things and I was pushing people away. But he didn't really know the easiest way to show that he loved my sister and I. So he was very, very much a mean brother. But it's to the point where he still is a little bit, but I know it's not to the extent it is, and he is not doing it to be, you know, just like as a jerk. It's just mainly messing around with us.
Yeah.
But on days where we're not mad at each other, he is genuinely my best friend, you know? So like he tells me things that I know that he doesn't feel like he can confide in anyone else. And I can do that with him as well. And we just, you know, that's not something I could always appreciate until after that had happened, you know?
Yeah.
That the easiest sense of community was my immediate family. You know, I always appreciated my parents, but I didn't realize how important my siblings were until after that happened.
Yeah.
And so that was the biggest one, is just the immediate people. And the other thing that I'm always grateful for is my friends. Like I mentioned Jake already, but there's an even larger group where he came from. I don't want to say larger, but there are other people there that are basically like my family. Like Jake's not my friend. He's basically my brother. Like he calls my Aunt Vicky, you know, like it's to the point where he can just show up at my house unannounced and crash on my floor for 3 days.
Sure.
And it would be like nothing happened.
Yeah.
So, and he's not the only one that I have that connection with, but you don't really understand, the extent that your friends will go to for you until they've actually done it.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
And the thing is that it wasn't this like, oh, I need to do this because there's no other choice. I know in my heart that him and the many other people that I was close to had that mindset long before it happened.
Yeah.
You know, and they would have done whatever it took to make sure that I was okay. And I would have done the same for them and still would.
Yeah.
Even if they're not like as prevalent in my life today, there are people that, you know, if it was to the point where I saw them again, we would pick right up like nothing ever happened, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and then we get to the TAA community, which was introduced to me, the extent of it, after my sophomore year. So we're a year out of me finally out of the rut. The year out after, I don't know what my dad had told to me one day, but he just walked into my room and sat down on my bed. This was during the period where I hadn't done anything. I was still in that depressive mindset.
Yeah.
I don't know what he told me exactly. I don't know what was said. I don't know how long it was said for. But whatever it was, I just was kind of like, okay, screw it. Like we're going to go to school today. And everyone, it was terrifying because even if it was in like a well-mannered, like they were excited to see me, everyone was like, oh my gosh, it's Allen. Like where has Allen been?
Yeah.
Like, it's been forever, you know? So, and obviously some of them were like my closest friends and still I consider to be people who are like family to me because I basically grew up with them. One of them I would literally walk to his house like every day, basically.
Sure.
And they basically were just like, what he said to me, he just kind of looked at me and nodded and just said, "I'm glad you're back." And that was all I needed.
That's amazing. You know? That's amazing because that could otherwise be a really intimidating and annoying process of having to explain, to each and every person. And if it's just that again and again, I mean, that's that can drive you back home. It's amazing to have a support like that.
Right. Yeah. Because as much as I'm appreciative of everyone being excited that I'm here, and as much as I kind of needed that, at the same time, I'm like, whoa, okay, we need to like dial this back like 12 because this is just a little too much right now. So, but it just having him and another one of my friends, the both of them simply just have her give me just a hug and just say welcome back, and him just kind of nod at me like, "I'm glad you're back, man." That was the easiest center because I could tell they knew that I was so overwhelmed by the aspect of even being there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I had already thrown up that morning, because I was so anxious, but it was the first time I had actually thrown up and still went to school because I knew I needed to do this. There were other days where I would use the fact that I had thrown up as an excuse to go right back to bed and not move for the remainder of the day. Well,
how did you feel when you got to the end of that first day?
Terrified, honestly, because it was like I didn't know basically what normalcy was at that point. Because I'm like, okay, this is the day where I'm back. I was doing online education. I wasn't doing in-person stuff.
Okay.
All of my things were through a computer because I had already missed so much school. I missed 55% of my freshman year of school by the time it ended.
Wow. The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support for those with Tourette syndrome or a tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the Tourette community. To learn more, go to tourette.org. That's tourette.org. The Tourette Association of America. Uncontrollable, unstoppable.
So they found out really early on that there was no way that I was going to manage like an in-class process. So they switched me to the online program that our school did, which many people did use, and I didn't even realize it at the time.
Right.
But the day basically consisted of me doing my online work when I was in that class with the one teacher who kind of manages those who are on that program. And going to the classes that I like audited, but I didn't really take the course. I was just in there to get a change of scenery. So by the time the bell rang at the end of the day, my legs weren't so numb from sitting in the same chair for like 6 hours that I would fall down. So, but the day consisted of like, oh my gosh, everyone is shocked that I'm even like alive at this point because I left without a word,
Yeah.
Like I was there one day, then some people knew I went to the hospital, but 99% didn't. And then I was just gone. So they had no idea what happened.
Yeah.
They knew that it wasn't anything serious, like to the point of passing, because whenever that had happened, it was an unfortunate news that we all had to hear and grapple with. But they all didn't know that if I like moved or something or what happened, because I really didn't talk to anyone other than like 2 or 3 people that went to the school. And it wasn't every day, and it wasn't like worthwhile conversation because I was terrified to really do that in the first place.
Yeah, sure.
So as soon as that day ended and I left and I walked over to my dad at this point, he still works as an aide, but he worked in a different school as an aide with a one-on-one student. And so I would walk over to that parking lot and get in the van and wait for their school to be out, and he'd come and join me. And I'm trying to think, I'm like, tomorrow is not going to be another day like today. It's going to go back to the way things were when I was gone. The difference is I'm here now, and I got to find a way to figure out how we're going to go through Monday. We got to go to Tuesday now, and Tuesday is done. We've got to get till Wednesday.
Yeah.
How are we going to make sure that I get through the day, ticks and all, to the point where I can get in, get what I need to do, taken care of, and get out of there, while also not feeling like I'm going to slip back to where I was.
Yeah.
And that thought scared me at first, but the more we did it, the better it started to be. And, we made it through.
Are you saying the more of a sense of a plan that was in place that you could repeat? Is there something in that helped?
That would be, plan is a weird word.
Yeah.
But for lack of a better one, yes. So just kind of basically the repetition of it got me to be more adjusted. And it's weird saying this. It's almost like I was having my first day of kindergarten in the middle of my freshman year of high school.
Huh.
Because it was so weird. I wasn't surrounded in a classroom by other people. I mean, I had my online classes that I was supposed to do. I didn't get a lick of that stuff done for like 4 months. Even before I went into the depressive episode, I had a really bad time actually doing my work.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't want to do it. I was very, admittedly, extremely lazy, especially that year. So it just was trying to re-understand the grasp of like, this is how it all works. This is what you need to do in order to get what you need to get done.
Yeah.
So, and my freshman year wrapped, and I had felt like I'd gone through like 4 years of my life in the span of just a school year.
Wow.
Because of how emotionally draining everything was on me. But we had moved on. My sophomore year was probably the most well-adjusted. Well, no, that was actually my junior year. My junior year was supposed to be my first year of actual normalcy. And then COVID happened, but we don't need to talk about that.
Okay. What happened? What I missed? No,
I know, right? Exactly. What is that word? But they started me off doing online courses for the first half of the year with a couple of in-person mixed in, because it's kind of hard to take Spanish with a computer. You kind of need that interaction with a teacher to kind of be able to get a language down.
That makes sense.
So that's why I didn't take it my freshman year, because 1, we wanted to minimize the number of courses I were taking, and 2, it was so hard, because the only reason I did really well was the fact that the guy who taught Spanish, the one I liked that most people did not like at all, I liked him a lot because his class, he taught it the way that I feel every foreign language should be taught if you're trying to grasp the language. So it was so easy for me to understand what was going on and get everything done.
Cool.
And that's so hard to do when you're supposed to click a speaker on a computer screen that is supposed to repeat back one word at a time to you to grasp. Like, this is too difficult.
Yeah.
So we adjusted myself to the point where it would be like kind of half and half for the first semester of the year. So, and then after that, I would transition into in-person classes for government, English, and physical science, which was the science course that I was taking that year.
Okay.
And I took those 3 online for the start, and then I took Spanish 2, statistics for my math course, which was stupid, but they didn't want to kind of drop me into pre-calc after having the year that I had, because I was 2 years ahead of everyone when I went into my freshman year, and then life happened.
Wow. Yeah.
So we kind of tried to think of a way to do it to where I could still be taking courses that were suitable for me, but weren't going to cause enough stress.
Yeah.
Which seemed like a great idea, but statistics was probably my least favorite class that I'd ever taken in my entire life, at least up until the end of the year, when we did a course on baseball statistics and we got to watch Moneyball, and it was so much fun.
Nice.
It was so much fun doing that. It made everything like worth it. Like
pay off.
When I'm able to like have fun doing work, like I liked math when it was like algebraic based. like doing equations and stuff like that, because I felt like I could click with it and understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And it would feel like fun for me. Like it was a way where I knew that there's a lot less stress going on. The tics aren't nearly, I say as I tick, the tics aren't nearly as bad because I'm in that environment where I know I'm doing better than I normally would be because I'm actually grasping what's going on. And then that course was just the opposite of it. I did not enjoy it.
Right. Yeah.
But it was overall the best year of school that I've like had in terms of how I've done, you know?
Nice.
I was doing great in courses. I was adjusted with people. I was actually sociable, which was a shock to some people because I would go in my freshman year and just have earbuds in the whole day, listen to music, not talk to anybody, and then just go home.
Yeah.
And so I would actually like hang out, and I'd have a group of friends that I talked to, some that I still do to this day. And I was to the point where I could say that I was like thriving. And
nice.
It was amazing. And that was when my attention got brought to the TAA. We had Akron Children's, I don't know if they still do this. I'm too old for it now, but they did a teen group of people that had gone through CBIT training when I was in high school.
Right. And CBIT, for people listening who are not familiar, that's a comprehensive behavioral intervention for tics. And it's a it itself is a non-pharmaceutical way of kind of negotiating with tics and premonitory urges. I'm not explaining it very well, but just for anybody listening, that's what we're talking about when we say CBIT.
That's the Cliff Notes version of it.
Right. Perfect.
And it doesn't work for everybody. Some people aren't receptive to it. But fortunately, I was for a while. The management of tics part still works. Like I always forget. It's like an inside joke at this point. I go to explain what this is, and I always forget what the words are supposed to be. Combative movements that prevent the action of a tic happening.
Yeah.
Whatever that is supposed to be called, there is a scientific word for it that my brain always farts every time I'm supposed to say that in any given situation.
I think of competing response. Yeah.
Thank you. That is the word.
Is that it?
Of course I did it again. Yeah. At this point, it's just been a running joke that anytime it gets brought up in conversation, whether it's someone who's going through CBIT on the list to go through it at Akron Children's, or just I'm explaining Tourette syndrome to someone else, that gets brought up. And right when it comes to that word, I'm like, I know it starts with a C and it's a 2-word phrase, but I can never remember what it is. But I still do those and they work, but my tics have gotten worse the older I get. But what I do say still that CBIT has worked, even though that is a fact, because everything else that I've learned through there has been instrumental for my management and anxiety. It's been instrumental for my outlook in terms of when I have serious bouts with my depression, and overall just my attitude towards me having Tourette syndrome. Like I was not happy. I thought I'm already just known as the emotional guy. Now I'm the emotional guy that just makes random sounds and movements, and that's all I'm going to be, which fortunately I'm not. I know I'm my own person. It's just a part of who I am. But that's kind of the way I felt. But it got me so engrossed of like, yeah, you know what? Some days this is really rough, but at the end of the day, it's part of who I am. And the best thing for me is to embrace it. And I'm so glad that it helped me have that attitude, because I love the TS community, you know?
Yeah.
Being able to go to training in 2019 in Florida for Youth Ambassador training. I was 16. It was in the summer of from my sophomore year going into my junior year, which is probably like the best period of my like life, if we're being completely honest. At least up until like this point, like we're at a great point for me right now, but like that was like the high for me.
Right.
Just had the best year of school, and I'm going into this amazing opportunity to finally like be a part of something with more people that have their own journeys that are similar to mine than I've ever met before in my life.
Yeah.
And it was incredible. It was so cool just to be able to see all of that, you know, to have other people obviously no two people, just like no two people have the same tics, no two people with TS have the same TS story.
Right.
But there's all a part of it that we can all relate to,
Absolutely.
regardless of what it is.
Absolutely.
So, and it was amazing. It was amazing for me. It was amazing for my mom. I think she almost got more out of it than I did because it was her first time really meeting that many parents that are going through the same journey we did in their own way.
And so you're talking in person, like you're interacting in person with people who have, not the same, but a similar walk of life enough to where you can, like feel something really, really strong in terms of a bond.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we're in person, we're all ticking. Tics are through the roof, but so is the serotonin,
Yeah.
It was great because there were other people there we were talking. They had never met someone else that had Tourette syndrome. I fortunately was able to through Akron Children's, but that number capped at 9. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it was just super, super amazing. There's still people that I talk to this day. And it kicked off everything that I've done. And doing presentations is like my favorite thing, whether it's in person or virtual. I obviously like doing in person more because you're able to connect more with who you're presenting to.
Yeah.
But doing in person is so cool because for a while I was interning with the TAA, and it became to a point where I wasn't like reliable enough to be able to do that every day. Now I'm kind of like what we're calling with quotes on call, to the point wherever if they have a presentation that they need done and no one who's able to do it, they'll ask me if I want to, and my answer every single time is duh. It's very cool because I've presented to schools. The first virtual presentation I did through the TAA was actually to a high school in North Carolina.
Really?
Which was really, it was really awesome to do. And what was really cool about that one was,
and this is a general audience, right? This is not just like an audience of people like you. This is people who are learning.
These are just the main reason these presentations get brought up to the TAA is because someone will submit that they want someone to come in to talk about it because they might be a student at a school that just got diagnosed and they don't know what that means, and they want people to know what this is, or the school says they have a student and they want the staff and the student body to be educated on what Tourette syndrome is. And in this case, it was someone who had been struggling with, I hate saying like mild or severe cases of Tourette syndrome.
I know what you mean.
The no-nos in my opinion, but they had their tics were extremely prevalent, and it was embarrassing to this person. And the story about that, they had a tic where they would yell bomb, and their PE teacher called the police on her.
Oh my God.
Or on this person, excuse me. And they wanted me to come in and do that presentation because they had it lined up and I was interning.
Yeah.
But what was really cool is that this person finally built up the confidence to want to be a part of this presentation. So it was kind of a back and forth between them and myself. I don't know what word I said, but it wasn't that. To where I would read a couple of slides and then they had a couple slides developed for themselves, where they would kind of talk in detail about other conditions that they had that they might see. And I asked if they wanted to read it, and they were like, yeah. And I'm like, this is great, because it was like they so badly wanted to be able to kind of take charge of what their journey is and make sure that this is who I am and that everyone knows this.
Yeah.
But for the longest time, due to how unfortunate the situations were with other people's reactions, I don't think they knew how to. And the coolest part about this is that last year I got to go do Rising Leader training in DC for National Advocacy Day.
Yeah.
And they were there training to be a youth ambassador. So it was super awesome to see, compared to how they were excited but so nervous during this presentation and on this call, versus in their own element.
Yeah.
When we were there in DC, it was just so awesome. That's so cool. Kind of just the impact that this community can have when we lift each other up and people are able to kind of just take charge of who they are. And it's incredible. That is probably my second favorite presentation I've ever done.
Yeah.
The first one I did was my aunt works at a preschool, and they had a child that was signed up there who had been going there for a while, but he was just diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. So I did a presentation with the staff, which was fun because I've known most of that staff at that preschool since I was literally like 3 years old, because I went there, and most of them still work there. So that was a lot of fun. But what was way more fun than that was when I presented to their school agers, which this is about a group of 45 6 to 10-year-olds, which that on paper sounds mortifying because the attention span of a 6 to 7-year-old is about the size of a grape on a good day. But they were so engrossed and engaged, and they asked better questions than some groups of adults that I presented to sometimes.
Oh, that's so cool.
And what was cool is that kid that ended up being diagnosed with Tourette syndrome was there. And so was his mom.
Yeah.
They invited his mom to come sit in and listen because she, like we were when I was diagnosed, didn't really know what Tourette syndrome was. And when the presentation ended, all of the other kids went back to class, but they let him and his mom kind of talk to my mom and I.
That's cool.
And we just chatted for about 25 minutes, kind of about like what we went through with CBIT, because they were on the waiting list of CBIT at this time. This was about a year and a half ago, I want to say.
Yeah.
Don't quote me, but that's kind of a gauge of where we're at. And just kind of talked about what our experience was like and how, like what the tics that I have did. And we asked him if he wanted to say what some of his were, and he did. He was very shy when he talked to us. But what was really cool is that his mom had sent an email to my aunt saying that they were beyond appreciative of the presentation and us willing to just sit and chat with them for as long as we did. And that also, as soon as they had left, I know that they wanted her to tell us that Noah might have seemed like he was very quiet when we were talking, but as soon as he left with his mom, he was talking a mile a minute about how excited he was about it and how much he loved the presentation and just talking to us.
So cool.
And there's a thing that Akron Children's does just to kind of help people learn about like what TS is like. It's called like your superpowers.
Yeah.
And like yeah. And so he was so excited to go home and tell his dad about his new Tourette syndrome superpowers. And that just like hit me. So I'm like, oh my gosh, it was so cool to hear about. And it's helping me so much kind of just fit where I am in life now, because like for the longest time I've kind of struggled with like feeling like just kind of aimless in life. And that like I don't really have a purpose myself, because I still kind of am struggling with what I want to do with my life, you know? Like I have things that I know that I'm passionate about, but
yeah,
I can't decide if I want to go on the left turn or the right turn or keep going straight. Who knows, you know?
Yeah.
And so moments like that make me realize that regardless of what I do going forward in my life, that it's going to involve this. Whatever advocacy I choose to do and however it looks like for me, whether I keep doing stuff with the TAA, whether I have my own organization that I do stuff with, even, you know, as crazy as some of that sounds, I know that it's my favorite thing that I do, you know? And I love it so much. Like we talked about personal projects.
Yeah.
I'm actually working on developing my own podcast to kind of go through. It's not going to be just advocacy. There's going to be like it's basically split in between advocacy, movies and music themed episodes.
Cool.
Is kind of what it's like right now.
Nice.
Basically just to be a vehicle for me to geek out about the things that I'm passionate about with my friends who are just as passionate about them as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also having this vehicle to be able to, you know, to have my voice out there, but also allow others to have it out there as well. I'm doing it with a couple of friends that I met through Washington, D.C. who are amazing. And it's just big, basically the center for me. You know, it's the core of what I love doing. I know for a fact, even if like I kind of fall out of love with certain things in my life, nothing is going to cause me to stop loving being an advocate like I am, because, I think of where I was when I was in high school and even younger, not knowing really what to do when I first got diagnosed.
Yeah.
Just being very upset, thinking it was just going to make everything worse. And then thinking where I'm at now and knowing that that's like my favorite part of where my life is at, is that I get to have those opportunities where I go in and speak to people and have them take things away like that. And it just makes my day, honestly, my next week,
there may be a number of parents listening to this. There's a lot of parents in the audience, and, hearing you speak about your parents and your other friends and resources, going from the difficulty that you've experienced and then kind of getting to where you are now, is there any kind of common denominator in how the people who supported you, any sense of style? Was it the space they gave you? Was it like, what was it that, if you could give advice to other parents in the room, so to speak, about, this is what they did that worked for me, what would you say that is?
For me, it wasn't this whole like common denominator of I know everyone did this one thing. It was they utilized exactly what their relationship with me was to reach out to me in the way that I think they knew would work.
Yeah.
Even if I wasn't receptive to it. My dad would just sit on my bed and talk to me every morning and just basically say like, hey, going to school today. Just want to make sure that you're doing all right. Get some more rest if you're still feeling sick.
Yeah. And
then my mom, before she would go to work, would just see how I was doing, and with my parents, it's basically just, I talk a lot with my parents when I get the chance to. And obviously the chance comes up a lot. I live with them still, but for them, they wanted me to know that they're always there without it feeling like they were invading,
That's the balance. Yeah. Of not intruding
it's very
too much.
Hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very hard to do, because obviously when you love someone as much as my parents love me, and I'm sure how every parent should love their child, and most of them do, to find a sense of figuring out, like, I want to do everything that I can, but not overdoing it. Because the problem is, trying to go above and beyond, there's nothing inherently bad with that.
Yeah.
But when someone's going through the things that they are, if they're struggling with suicidal ideation, or they're going through a bout with depression where they're really they have no motivation to even get out of bed in the morning, trying to understand that it's not like, it's not necessarily them choosing to not be receptive to that. It's just the fact that that's the battle that they're fighting right now.
Yeah.
And some people are going to be receptive to being, I don't know the proper way to put this, but kind of just without finding that balance of, going too far overboard.
Yeah.
Some people need the overhaul, Some people don't necessarily, aren't understanding that they need help until the help kind of hits them in the head.
Yeah.
For lack of a better phrasing on that. But for me, I kind of needed that as well. And that was when I had gone to the hospital. The help literally hit me over the head there. And from then on, I knew it was there with my parents, but they knew that they needed to do what was best for me. They would just chat with me at the beginning and end of every day, making sure that, we get it. It's rough right now, but making sure that bare minimum, I'm at least okay. And it obviously, it meant the world for me in my journey. I'm so grateful that I have the parents that I do, because I could have very easily had parents that wouldn't care, much less go to the extent that they do.
And that happens.
It unfortunately does. But they're the best parents I could possibly ask for. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. And
sorry for like the emotional, like coarse voice Allen came out, but
bring out the emotion for real. I mean, that's
I have no shame in showing emotion. I am a very core believer in that like there's videos on my Instagram of me speaking at Tic Night Out events. Mm-hmm. And this past year, I literally said no shame in showing emotion because a parent before me started crying.
Yeah.
And she said, I apologize as soon as she started. And it was like, you should never apologize for being emotional, especially when the emotion is coming from how much you're loving your son that you're talking about. Right
completely
now.
Appropriate.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And to me, that just shows everyone else how appreciative of this community and the doctors that are helping him, and just how grateful you are for him himself, you know? And mm-hmm. like my mom said she never wants to speak at another Tic Night Out event again that we had, which for those not listening, oh my gosh, for those listening and don't know what that is, it is the Akron Children's event that they put on annually once a year for all of their tic and Tourette patients at the hospital, just to come and spend a day mm-hmm. and just kind of be free of any sort of outside pressure. You're surrounded by other people who tic just like you.
Yeah.
So there's no need for that irrational feeling of I'm not allowed to tic in this space.
Yeah.
So, and her and I 2 years ago both spoke, and we sobbed into the microphone the entire time. What my mom said was amazing. Like it was very great. What she said and had to say was really amazing. But the problem was that she was so emotional that she felt like none of it was going to be receptive. I'm like, that's not the case.
Right.
If anything, they're going to realize how much that, you know, you've put into this and how much care and love you have for not just me, but the team of people that have helped get me to where I'm at today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, I know there are some parents that have no clue what to do, because I know at one point in time, those were my parents. Mm-hmm. I know they were kind of scared and confused and concerned, and where we at today, where they're seeing me doing what I'm doing. And obviously you never stop being a parent, even when your kids are like full blown adults. But, you know, they realize that where I'm at today, I'm in a place where even if it's not like incredible, obviously there's a lot that I'm going to need to figure out in terms of what I'm doing with my life. Like, I'm not going to be working at the hospital that I'm at forever. I don't want to do that. And they're kind of helping me kind of get on the horse to figure out what's next, you know, but They know that I'm happy now, you know, and that's something that wasn't always the case. And I would take kind of a couple years of, my life situation isn't amazing. I don't love the job I have, but I love the fact that I'm where I'm at in my life. And I wouldn't change that right now for anything. So
you've done some real self-acceptance, not easy, but you know, you've gotten
really,
there.
Yeah. Like an overhaul of that. So I went from, I genuinely hated myself, and I could say that with confidence at one point in my life. And now, regardless of any sort of the insecurities obviously live in the back of your brain. Things like that never really go away, I don't think.
Right.
But what changes is whether or not you're choosing to listen to them.
Yeah.
And thankfully I've gotten to the point where I don't. So it's made all of the difference. And I know for a fact I wouldn't be able to make the choice to be able to do that without people like my parents and my friends and my siblings. So
was wondering what advice you might give to someone who is in the situation that you found yourself in previously, where, you know, like, your self-opinion was not high. You didn't want to go out. Mm-hmm. You were, you know, like you were struggling. That someone who has, and as we say in the podcast, Tourette syndrome is not a rare disorder, but it's a rare experience to have. And,
right.
You know, often a lot of people do feel isolated when they have it. Do you have any advice for people who were kind of in a painful situation like you were in?
Yeah. It's like I said before, it's very hard to just accept everything about yourself when you're going through the thick of it. But you have to embrace some of it in baby steps. When you're really at the lowest point, you have to kind of celebrate every small victory that you can. And for me, sometimes that was just, hey, I know I didn't leave my house, but I got out of bed today and I actually ate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was I was very bad when it came to food. My freshman year, I was very, very, very skinny because I barely ate and I was sick all the time.
Mm.
And so I would celebrate days where I actually had 3 meals,
Yeah.
and that was like a baby step, and maybe you're someone who is ashamed of your Tourette syndrome. And so you compress your tics all day and then you let them all out at home. And because of that, you start to feel ashamed of who you are. Maybe your small victory is I ticked in public today and I didn't care what anyone thought.
Right.
Or maybe it's I'm just sitting alone, but there are 2 other people across the hall and they saw me tick and I'm not immediately about to compress the rest of them.
Right.
Trying to find that sort of baby step way of embracing what goes on in your life and that part of who you are is instrumental to getting to the point where you can truly say that you aren't ashamed of anything about who you are. And Tourette syndrome is nothing to be ashamed of. It really isn't. But that's not an easy thing to just hear and say, okay, yeah, so I'm just going to embrace all of this.
Right. Yeah. You feel shame. I mean, that's something that's
right.
going to come. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if you have loud tics that hurt, or I've got one tic where when I'm sitting down, my left leg will shoot straight up and my knee will smack whatever's in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll just bang a table in the middle of a room while everyone's taking a test, and they'll just immediately look at me like, why are you being so loud? It is very hard to not find judgment in those moments, but you got to try to find a way to get to a point where you can do that and be like, yeah, okay, I've got a medical condition. Can you stop staring at me, please?
Right.
I'm not behind a glass wall in a museum.
Right.
This is just my existence. This is my life. I'm just trying to live it. And the easiest way to get to that is by starting to just accept that your tics happen, not to let them make you so anxious to be around people, even though the anxiety is going to be there, not to let them think that you are someone who should be ashamed of everything about yourself, and to make you think that you aren't someone who should be loved or even love yourself, And unfortunately, I've been there, not just because of my tics, but because of other things as well. And I found that other than appreciating the people around me to help me get to where I'm at now, the biggest thing too was celebrating along with them whenever I had accomplished what the smallest step I possibly could.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually that step is going to turn into a big stride, and it's going to make a huge difference. And it's going to be to a point where you are embracing every bit about yourself, and it's going to be amazing. So that would be the advice that I give.
Wow. And I don't have any more questions. I think this has been awesome. I loved hearing about your journey, and I really relate to a lot of it, except for the math part. I'm terrible at math, but everything else you said, I mean, a lot of it definitely, maybe in some kind of wavery way, kind of mirrors a lot of my life. And I still have my challenges. Things are still not easy, but I've learned how to deal with a lot of the stuff that I didn't know how to deal with in the past. And a lot of it is, it's through repetition, through experiencing it, through, getting brave for a day, and, tallying up these little victories that add up to a lot after a while. And it's been a lot of fun listening to you kind of go through it and talk about it, because I feel like relatable to a lot of people.
Yeah, I appreciate you so much for having me on here. So it's been a great conversation. Obviously, like I said, I'd love any chance I can get to be able to advocate within the community and just kind of share my story, because I do believe that not only is there a small chance that I'm helping others when I'd be able to do stuff like this, but I know for a fact I'm helping me make those steps just to be even more appreciative of where I'm at today. So
Thanks so much for listening. Thanks to Allen Shoaf for being an amazing finale guest for season 8 of Tourette's podcast. Thanks to the Lawrence family for all you do, and to Ryan for the strength of character everyone will remember him for. Thanks also to the Tourette Association of America for having kept this podcast going for years. Tourette'sPodcast.com has all the past episodes, so many of them, so many different stories from so many different people. Tourette.org also has the episode collection if you scroll down just a bit. Remember TouretteConference.org for Tic Con coming up in May. Don't miss it, a free virtual event. TouretteConference.org. And of course, thanks to Brittany, Aya, Cass, Lily, Mads, Peter, Slayton, Jonelle, Shauna, Tom, Eric, Dan, Amanda, being Amanda Talty, CEO of the TAA, who joined us for an episode, Stephen, Bianca, Raven, Tara, Sophie, Shelby, and of course, Alan, for being amazing people on Tourette's podcast during season 8. Can't thank you enough for the conversations you brought. And thanks to Geeks Rising, the podcast network at geeksrising.com, for amplifying our voice and giving us a general audience connection. Thank you so much, Bandrew. It's been amazing. And thanks to you for sticking with us through another season of Tourette's podcast. Keep in touch for updates and keep the conversation alive in the discussion group. To reach me, you can email tourettespodcast@gmail.com or use the contact link at tourettespodcast.com. I'll talk to you again soon. This is Ben.